Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. Before we start, I have a couple questions. How many people are already comfortable scripting? Okay, that's a lot of you. That's good. Is anyone already doing application development? All right, cool. So this will be interesting. So I can kind of show you what I did to get to there. Did anybody go to the basic scripting presentation that was, I think it was here first thing yesterday, or maybe it was second? Okay. I got some really cool stuff out of that one. I thought it was really nice. Did anybody go to the Swift Hackathon? What was that, Tuesday? I was there till 10:45. Apparently they went till midnight. I did not feel like I could stay up that late. Maybe I'm old. Josh from Orchard Grove did a really good presentation yesterday from going from sysadmin to a software developer. If you didn't go to that, I highly recommend checking it out when they put it on YouTube, because that was actually a really good one. Anyway, I'm going to try my best here to not assume that everyone knows everything that I'm going to say and all the terms, because I know it's frustrating not to know, and you don't want to be the only one who doesn't know and get embarrassed to ask or whatever. Sometimes nerds forget that other nerds don't know the same nerd stuff. And anyway, if you guys have something to ask or add, raise your hand. We'll throw a catch box over to you, and we'll make sure that we get that on the record here. I just want to make sure that it's kind of a little bit more of a discussion and less of a lecture. So this is my opening slide. If anyone hasn't seen this XKCD, give it a quick read. Everyone read it? I should have just read it out loud, right? That ruins all the jokes. The general point here is, hopefully, everyone can be one of the lucky 10,000. Was everyone done reading? Did I ruin it? You can look it up again. It's a common one. So from idea to script to app, a beginner's journey in app development. I'm the beginner here. It seemed like a lot of you are too. About a year ago, I set myself a goal to learn app development. I thought it would be fun, and I know a few people who've put apps in the App Store. I know people who've contributed to open source projects and shared their work online on GitHub and stuff. I'd hoped that by going through this, I would learn enough to be able to contribute in some of those same ways and share my work with the community, but more importantly, be able to make my work for my day-to-day job more efficient to manage Macs. I've always been interested in developing software, and though I once held the inaccurate title of software engineer, I wouldn't describe myself as a developer yet. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I'm Adam Wickert. I didn't even put my real name on there. I did a who am I. I'm a desktop systems administrator at Hamilton College in Clinton, New York. My primary duties there are specialty lab systems, and I do a lot of work on the Mac management in Jamf Pro. Now that we're on package-based deployment, I do a lot in building new packages for stuff that used to be on those big gold master images that are so bad. I did find out earlier this week that imaging is dead, because if you go to isimagingdead.com, it just says yes. There's a little link at the bottom that goes to the K-Base article from Apple. This is my second time presenting here. Apparently I did well enough last time that they decided I could come back. I found this to be a fantastic conference, and I'm glad that everyone's here, because I have learned a ton, and it's really nice to network and meet people who do the same thing that you do in other places and get some of those ideas that you don't have yet. So anyway, I'm glad to be here again. A little bit about myself. I'm a new dad, which is amazing. My wife and I had our first son back in March. Thank you. So he's 4 months old. And I miss him like crazy, because I've been gone. This is the first time I've been gone for more than a work day. The worst thing is, I'm not actually sleeping. I'm still waking up in the middle of the night at the same time I would normally and texting my wife, who's up feeding him. Anyway, I'm sure. Someday. Anyway, I've been at Hamilton College for a little over 2 years now. I got really excited when I hit 2 years, because then I could start saying, well, I've been doing this for years. So I thought that was good. I've learned a ton about managing large numbers of computers, and scripting and packaging and profiles and development, and in between whatever the users ask for. It's been interesting because I came in with a lot of experience with Mac stuff, but you can very quickly find out that you don't know much of anything. And lately, like, virtual reality is a really big thing, and everybody wants to get into that, and there aren't even great resources yet because it's still so new. But the plus side is I get to order all these computers with like high-end video cards, and I have to test them and make sure that they work, right? So that's fun. I got a lot of Mac experience through several jobs. I fixed hardware, I supported software. I started using Macs back in high school for photography and graphic design, and I sort of stumbled my way into fixing them because the IT department at my school didn't know anything about Macs. I didn't either, but I was willing to learn. We had a lab of G4 towers, which were really cool at the time. I helped configure for my senior year a video lab, which had all brand new G4 towers that we ordered right before the G5s came out. But I went to college for video production, so it was kind of a radio and television thing, and I continued using Macs, but it was more day-to-day use and less support, but it still got me really familiar with it. First, I want to say what this is not. I want to get started and set expectations. I'm not teaching you how to build an app. Not exactly. And I love a good step-by-step guide, don't get me wrong. I think going through the tools, the thought process, and the experience for me might be a little more helpful to those people who are self-starters and those looking to get beyond where they are, especially since a lot of you said that you're doing some scripting. And I hope, as my title suggested, this is about my journey as a beginner. The good news is I have an agenda of what we will cover. We're going to talk about the path that I took to learning app development, some helpful workflows and tools, some resources that I have found helpful, and discussion of ideas and methods. As a desktop systems administrator, I have a few responsibilities here. This is a list of them. A lot of them kind of overlap, they work together, and there's a lot of skills and knowledge that transfer between them, and include some of the steps that I'm talking about here. Just because that was in the job description doesn't mean I was doing that from day one, because in some of those things, I didn't know it yet. I've always said if you ever want to learn a lot about a topic, you should sign up to give a presentation on it, because I have learned so much more new stuff in the last 6 months and made myself so much more efficient by trying to go out and teach other people how to do it too. Some years ago, I set out to learn about the command line. I had been working with a script to manage some triage drives for computers with multiple OSs on them, and while I had it working, I wanted to learn more. A coworker told me, man. And I looked at him like, what? So then he explained to me that it's the manual page for the manual display function in the command line. It's actually a pretty good place to start to learn a little bit how you utilize it, because it tells you how the command works, and it's a great start. It's not going to explain everything, but I was often told that college isn't about teaching you to memorize things, but how to find answers yourself, and I think this is a tool that gets you there. Let me start with a quick story. So my brother is in college. He's going to college for computer science. We were talking about some of his classes in programming, and he wondered how he could make some of the programming lessons stick. I decided when I was learning terminal scripting that a good way to do it was to come up with an idea and make something. So I suggested making a little app that he can use for something, but it was something he liked to do. It doesn't matter if someone's already done it. It just might stick better than making another blackjack or dice game. It got me thinking about workflows, and we're going to start at the beginning here, which is an idea. So to get to my idea, I have to talk about where it came from. Using terminal and the command line, these are things that I set on new machines that I deploy. I set a firmware password and encryption for security. The appropriate users are given admin rights, and the computer name is set to match our inventory system, which allows us to track and manage them in Jamf. Is everyone kind of vaguely familiar with what these things do, or have any questions or anything? I just want to make sure we're kind of on the same page. Cool. So we want to make sure that these things are set correctly before a user gets a new system. I can manually check all these settings in terminal, like so, or if someone else set them, I might want to check them again, or someone might have applied an OS update and something changed, or some policy from the Jamf server that shouldn't have been applied was applied, or a user changed them even though they probably shouldn't have been able to. But you have to remember those commands, and if you're not in front of the machine, you have to get into it remotely, and that's something else we're not really talking about here. But manually typing this stuff can get tedious. So I think to myself, there's got to be a better way. I just recently watched Friends, by the way. I didn't watch it when it was new. I think I was too young to get it. I finally understand it. I'm old enough, I guess. I thought it was pretty funny. I'm like way late to the party. Nobody wants to talk about Friends. So of course, the better way here is to link the things together to set them and verify them and ensure that they're done in the right order, which brings me to the next step, scripts. I think it's a pretty obvious step, and it's a good start for a lot of people. There's a lot of ways to accomplish it. I also find it hilarious that if you Google search anything about scripting, it's always JavaScript. You want to look at a hacking image, it's what they put on TV, it's always JavaScript. Apparently it's the scariest language. I think there's just a lot of lines in it, and if they color code it, it looks scary if you don't know what it is. It's either that or just random stuff in green on black. So I've got an idea I was talking about earlier. I'm going to automate these settings and check that they work. So I link together these commands in a bash script. And of course, for the uninitiated, bash is the shell implementation that is included in macOS. It stands for the born-again shell, and it acts as the unishell or the command line interpreter. It's also a command language, which is exactly as simple as it sounds. It's a language to give commands to a computer. It also means that I can string together tasks that would normally be entered at the command line. Compared to programming languages like Python or Perl, the syntax might be a little bit simpler to learn, especially for those who were coming from just learning terminal commands. You may also notice in this script I have a section that says expect. The expect shell allows some interaction. So in the case of setting a firmware password, I have it basically set and interact and type and enter. The expect shell allows for the pseudo terminal kind of thing where the script acts as the master and creates and controls its terminal process within the script and interacts with it since we've provided it information. Calling this within the script, though, still lets us save and run it as a bash script, and Mac supports the expect shell, so there's nothing special you have to do in order to get it to work. For this example script, I've kind of sanitized and created a simplified copy of these commands in one script to share. We actually pull things out of a file that our inventory system creates that has a inventory number for the naming convention. It's got the firmware password and admin users. It's created based on the serial number so that when we image a machine, it searches on a database for the serial number, pulls that file back down, and then all these variables are set based on that file. So I just pulled that part out for good measure. But that does give us a point of failure. In the system that we have to make sure that the serial number matches correctly. So if you have the wrong physical system, it's not going to work. If somebody didn't set those things correctly, it's not going to work. If someone forgot to do it at all, it's not going to work. They're not going to be there. If we select and don't update things, we're missing some pieces. It doesn't always happen, but there are times when one or more of those steps might have failed for some reason. And for good measure, since we know things don't work as expected, I should be able to spot check these things on new systems. Here's a script that I can run to make sure that these settings are correct. It's a simple script that I just run to check a few settings. File vault is actually handled by a Jamf policy, but we can still check it with the command line. Is everybody still with me here? Does anybody have any questions or anything? I know it's kind of a beginner thing, but I just want to explain what I was doing. So when you run this script, you have to do it as root. It provides us with output to show what the settings are on the machine so we can find out if they're correct. But to run it as root, I'm going to use the sudo command, which I guess was originally the super user do, but I have found out more recently it's actually substitute user do. because you can run as a different user that isn't root. If you don't specify it, it does go by default to root. It actually runs fine without a sudo command, but it returns the firmware password thing, giving an error and explaining how to use it correctly and that it requires root access. So the script doesn't fail, it just gives you a really long line of text instead of a firmware and password enabled yes. We get the true, which is the next thing there to let us know that file vault is enabled. The group membership is the list of users in the admin group, and then the computer name, local host name, and host name, which are all set the same. I'm going to make some minor changes to the script because if I'm actually going to use this, I want it to have some human readable output. So I added some echo statements to label the output. I wanted to cut off the beginning of the admin list thing where it says group membership. So I actually counted the number of characters and started after that by using the curly braces and the little +16 thing, so that when it prints out, it actually prints out a useful human readable list of things that are set or not set correctly. And this is a quick sidebar, I guess. I think an important piece that came between scripting and development in my learning was packaging. Since once I have a script working, there inevitably is going to be more things to add and automate. In this example, we might package a file with our configuration data and have it run in our settings script using the free program whitebox packages. We add the file to a location in the folder structure. We ensure that the permissions are correct. Anyone who saw my presentation last year on data transfer knows that I'm always talking about permissions. Although I'm sure lots of people have talked about it here because at least 2 presentations I saw mentioned making sure that you set the execute permission. So I found packaging is kind of a great skill here. You can add your script after you've added your file. Got myself ahead of myself there, sorry. You add more steps in customization to your scripts, and there's other things that might come up once you've made a package. You might need to sign it if you want to upload it to your JSS and make sure that nothing comes up. So that's another thing that might come up so you don't get that gatekeeper warning. You're thinking about things that you might do in the future, signing things, creating that certificate. If you're a Mac developer and you're registered, guess we got a question? Oh. No, that was just the whitebox packages. Sorry. Which is, it's an application for packaging. So there's a lot of ways to use packages. Some things that I do, I have to create a package to install software with some specific data for a class. I have some files that might have to be put down and modified on different systems. I have multiple software installs that I package all together so that I have one package for a lab that I need to quickly deploy, or maybe a piece of software with a license file. So if this is where we are now, we've made a package. And if you're anything like me, you like to see how someone else did something in order to learn how to do it yourself. So I found a great way to learn ever since I learned HTML when I was in middle school, right-clicking to view source in Internet Explorer. I took the class that they offered in junior high and realized I already kind of knew everything that they were talking about and they were teaching us, but I had learned, which was good. So if you want a tool to inspect and understand how some things have been done, this is a program called Suspicious Package. It lets you kind of explore what's in a package file. It's a good way to get an idea of what people are doing when they're making their own packages, but it also lets you look at pre- and post-flight scripts. I picked the installer package from the application R. It's a free statistical software that I install for science faculty pretty regularly. But taking a look at this package gives me a lot of information on how the package was made and whether it's signed, how many scripts it has, and where it came from. And then the Files tab shows you which files are added, where they're located, and the permissions for any of them. It's really similar to what you get in white box packages when you're making one yourself. So it's actually kind of cool to see what somebody else is doing, because whether or not they're using that tool, it gives you the same type of interface. I think this is the coolest part, though, because you can check out the scripts that are included. You can actually scroll through any scripts and see how other people are doing things, either as a pre or post flight, so before or after installs, and get a really good idea of how people do things that are related to maybe installing an application or even just writing a script, and how that useful information could come to you to something that you might need to do. There's also a lot of notes. People are pretty good about leaving notes and comments in their scripts, so a lot of times there's a hashtag and an explanation of what the thing that they are writing does. If you're lucky, then that's a good way to learn. If you're not lucky, then there's no notes and you have no idea what anything is, and all the variables have been minimized, so every variable is just one character. Maybe you want to start searching on GitHub, see how someone else accomplished it. You find a post in Jamf Nation, you ask in the MacAdmins Slack, you get a link to a blog post. But this might be the point where you're starting to think about moving beyond a script. In this part of the journey, we've learned how to write scripts and package them, and we're looking for something more to accomplish the things we're doing. It might be as simple as giving a graphic user interface for users who might be a little afraid of the command line and the way that it looks. The script might be fully capable, but it scares people if that little window with the white text on black shows up, and that's not what they're expecting. We're approaching new territory with app development. As a side note, that's Vince Vaughn. This was a movie that they did, and they just shot a bunch of stock photos, and apparently it was just free. And I thought that was funny. It was like an in-joke, but then I explained it, so I ruined it. So there's a ton of languages you might consider if you're going to get into development. Some of the languages that are really popular are things like Python and Swift, Objective-C. Most Mac apps are in Swift or Objective-C. Doesn't mean that they all are. A lot of them have some kind of wrapper. Web development, for instance, leans a lot on Ruby on Rails. Node and React are JavaScript libraries that can run server-side back-end stuff that might be helpful for an app, but it's easier for people who have web experience to jump into and start their kind of actual development versus that web design. A couple of links here are some great ones that I have either found myself and used or would recommend to people. There's edX. Has anyone done anything with edX yet? Okay, like one or two hands up. That's cool. But it's actually a really cool, they call it massively open online courses. And schools like Berkeley and MIT and Harvard post stuff. And in complete honesty, if you're even a little bit of a beginner in computer science, Harvard's CS50 course is fantastic. It's a super well done, which I guess makes sense. They have tons of people who take it every year, but they have super well done videos and some interactive modules, and you can take it for free. You can choose to get an honor credit, which can be used for like continuing education credits in some places. Not every place necessarily offers those, but the information is the same either way. It's real college courses though, like these are actual videos from them. My school actually has a couple up there that are on jazz. We have a jazz archivist at our school, and he actually did a really cool program on that. It's still up there, but I don't think they're doing any new versions of it. But the CS51 from Harvard gets updated pretty regularly. There's now like 4 sub-courses on things like game development and design, and I think virtual reality and all kinds of other like new emerging technologies, or really more specific versions of existing technologies that are pretty cool. What else have we got here? Codecademy, if anyone hasn't used that, it's actually a pretty good one. I found that I like the play with it in the browser thing, and it saves your progress. You can log in on a different computer. It's how I learned JavaScript when I, as I mentioned before, was inaccurately titled a software engineer. But I've actually gone through a lot of other stuff. They even have like command line type stuff to learn now, and they've got all kinds of languages, and they even have some paid tracks, which it's debatable whether you think it's worth paying for it, but they give you access to experts who will grade your code, give you comments on it, and then you get access to their like premium tier stuff too. It's pretty cool. Let's see what else we got. Hacking with Swift, that's a great one if you want to start to learn Swift. I am a super Swift beginner. I was at the Swift night for Hackathon, and it was still a little over my head. But it's cool. Of course, the conference, the MacAdmin conference YouTube channel, learnpython.org, Swift Playgrounds on the iPad. Dev.tube is a new one that I recently found out about. It's all videos from conferences and tech talks and stuff that gives you some cool information. The Jamf Nation Apple TV app, Free Code Camp, there's a ton of options. With those links in mind, I thought the easiest place to start was using Python and Tkinter, which I found out about at the 2016 MacAdmins conference here from a presentation by Bryson Terrell, I think it is, of Jamf Software. He's actually speaking again this year. And he's going to be at the hackathon space tonight talking about Python. It's about an hour and 15 minutes, but it goes through a great start of Tkinter, which lets you craft graphic user interfaces for Python. It sounded like a transition I could make from writing bash scripts to making apps. There's a link on there. It's easily found. It's on the MacAdmins YouTube channel. So being a relative beginner, as I said, I've gone to Codecademy. I went there and went through a one-day resolution thing they had that they emailed me all about in, I think it was late December, to say, we've got New Year's resolutions, learn something new. One time in my life, I thought learning a new coding language was like a punishment. At one of my former jobs, the reason it came up was, we're letting go of this contractor, so you need to take over what he was doing. Or we're going to redevelop this program so we don't need to keep working with this outsourcing company. Meaning I had to suddenly start to learn something new that I had no idea what I was doing, and I continued to have no idea what I was doing. Yeah, I had a lot of trouble trying to meet deadlines in that. This was when I was a software developer, but I was really just a web designer. I personally found that Python used similar syntax I understood. Some simple things like using the hashtag to denote comments, brackets similar to JavaScript, that it made a little bit more sense. But then there's a lot of stuff that I started to read about the differences between Python 2 and 3, and macOS currently has version 2.7, which was released after 3 to bridge Python 2 and Python 3 in some ways. I've read tons of stuff about Python, and trying to make things really compatible with both is apparently not the easiest thing in the world, but it seems like 2.7 is deployed in a lot of places, and 3 has been around for like 10 years. So as a start, I was going to try to create a graphic user interface here, make it easy to pull the data from a file that I create with a script, because I have that script already. I could just pump that information to a file. It would hopefully work by clicking an icon, read the file, and show me whether the settings are correctly set. I tried to make the simplest version I could, and man, I found myself struggling. Converting a script from bash script to Python was tough for me, because I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how to find out how to do it. I went through a few different books on Python. I read 3 or 4 beginners books on Python that gave me some great information, but they didn't really tell me how to get from point A to point B. They told me this is how this thing works. I was really having trouble trying to figure out how to get the information that I needed from point A to the app that I was writing in point B. I didn't really make a lot of headway, but I started mentioning some of the issues I was having, and in between banging my head on the wall, a friend's offhand comment mentioned using tools like Appify or Platypus to make something into an app. I hadn't heard of either of those and decided to look into them. Appify seemed like a really easy tool to use, since I already knew HTML from a previous job. It's based on like a folder structure in HTML5, and you'd code in HTML5 to make the UI, you add a config file, and in theory, you're pretty much done. If you're not already aware, on a Mac, an app file is actually a package file. Within the package are folders like the contents folder, and you can explore them by right-clicking and hitting View Package Source. You might have done that before if you followed instructions a few years back on how to create a bootable USB installer for installing a previous version of OS X. Appify uses a folder structure, a config file, a shell script, a compiled binary for the interface, an interface, and the URL. It seems simple enough. The UI app is simple. You drop the files in. But at the bottom of the GitHub page, there's a link that said, MacGap is probably what you should be using. So before I went any further, I decided to click that link. I looked at MacGap. It seemed to offer a lot of options. And there's a version 2 in the works that has further features and compatibility. Basically uses an API in JavaScript. Does everyone know what an API is? Yes? No? Close enough. I don't even remember what it stands for. Something programming interface? Good job. I forgot. Application programming interface. So the instructions seemed pretty easy here. Clone the GitHub repo, modify the public HTML file, public/index.html. But there wasn't a lot more documentation. The site's pretty well organized, but it was still lacking. And they're asking, even though it's been some years that this has been in development, they've been asking for people to help with documentation, help with development. And it's not abandoned, it still works. I just was curious if something else might work better. I still hadn't looked at Platypus at this point, so I looked at that website. There's a ton of documentation, which for me as a beginner was really good. I read through the site and saw what might be the perfect implementation of my app idea to check those settings. It's going to be a status menu dropdown. I took the script that I wrote earlier that checks those settings. I followed the simple instructions in Platypus. Effectively, you take a look at this screen, you drop in the script path, you give it a name, and then you create app. Did almost everything I wanted, except that it couldn't check the firmware password because that requires root. Well, no problem. When I looked at that interface, there was a checkbox to run with root privileges, but that wasn't available in the status menu option. So I try a text window and run that with root privileges. And it asked for an admin password, so that was good, but it gave me the same error, and that was bad. So I went back to the script from earlier to do some editing. I basically just commented out that firmware password check to see if I could make something that did work. One more time, I create a status menu app with Platypus. And now I have a nice status menu app that runs and checks some of our settings and has a nice label to tell whether those sections actually worked. I can still run the script as root and see if the firmware password status is correct. But this is a nice start, and it's something that I can deploy to users if we needed the help desk to check something. It doesn't have to run in the menu bar all the time. You can just click it to run, and then there's a quit. And obviously, I've barely scratched the surface of app development. But what I did do is create an app that was functional. I've met that goal. Continuing to make this a more useful app with more features would be a great project, and I'm going to keep doing it. I'll be posting these basic scripts in the app file in GitHub, so if anyone wants to take a look or felt the need, they can check it out. It is all really basic stuff, but it's where I started, and I thought it was a good way to explain what was happening. And while this presentation didn't take all that much time to explain what I have done, it took me way more to get to this point, because I was a beginner. I guess there's a couple of possible paths if you want to create an app. You could learn a new programming language like Swift. You could use a language that you might know with a GUI tool like Tkinter and Python. Or you could use a helper tool like Appify or Platypus, which was a great start for me. I thought it worked really well. And now I guess it's time to explain a couple of things. This is fine. If you were expecting more on Swift, well, let me tell you, so was I. Things come up, and you can't control all of them. Sometimes you might have a baby. That's awesome. It also means you have less time for those things that you might have wanted to do in your free time, because what's free time? You might have medical issues with a family member. You might have to take extra time off of work that you didn't intend to. Or, like happened to me, unfortunately, twice in the course of this last year, you lose a team member that hasn't yet been replaced. So suddenly you go from a larger number of people to a smaller number of people. Now all the smaller number of people have to do the same amount of work. It makes things harder. I came up with this idea late last year. A lot of things came up. I mentioned some of them. There's other stuff, of course. But a developer coworker of mine who works in our web development office, he's one of the people who does our school's apps that they have in the App Store for both Android and iPhone. He told me he thought this was a great idea even if I wasn't successful, because it's worth telling the story of how you did what you did even if the plans didn't work out. And that I think that it's really important that you talk about overcoming those obstacles. Don't give up just because it got hard. Don't give up because you don't have enough time anymore. Work towards finding a little bit of time here and there, because if you think about it, you could watch one less episode of a TV show that week and get yourself a few more minutes. You could take your lunch break and eat your sandwich while you read a book. Those are all options. It's ways to find time and something that you can do that might help you and get there, even if something else came up and made it hard. I learned so much as I prepared this presentation, and I've gone back and found I now understand so much more of what I was trying to learn with previous projects and see where I made mistakes. And now I've put time into learning something new, and I can go back and help yesterday Adam so that future Adam can do something better. Also, as a very random side note, I went out of my way to ensure I credited this because it's a meme and people don't usually get credited for those things. And this guy is also, Casey Green also created another very famous internet meme that is decidedly less safe for work. I will tell you about it later because I don't even feel like I should say it on camera. I want to open the floor to discussion. I'd love to hear if anyone has other ideas, if anyone else has tried anything, if you've got resources to share, if you have feedback on resources that I suggested, or any questions about the way I did things, or if you think that I could have done something better, because chances are I just didn't know that it existed if there was something. We got a question over here. He's got the catch box in the back.
Ready?
So actually mine is not even a question, it's just like we do my work every day.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in the time of like, okay, we have to buy some software, how to manage the Macs, of course Jamf comes as a first, and so on. And my CTO said, no, today's day you don't have to buy anything. It's all there, don't spend any money. It will be a shame of you if you spend any single penny to manage Mac, to create the stuff. So what we did, we put an agent on all our Macs, mm-hmm. and me and the security guy, because as you said, the team got strength every day, and we just created like a script, like a normal bash script, mm-hmm. that basically even from the beginning of the Mac, once I create the user, the first user, the script, I deploy the script and it does everything. Install Google Chrome, check all the settings, change the host name, bind mm-hmm. to the domain, install everything. And it's homemade, we know where to go, we know what to modify, and it's been working great. So I highly recommend,
With things like that, if you've got something that works, that's awesome. One of the things that Josh from Orchard and Growth mentioned was he saw a lot of people who wrote their own versions of things that already existed. It doesn't mean that they didn't work, but it meant that they were complicated and harder to support because Apple already had something that did it in this particular case, and they were writing a new API basically that caused difficulty in updating because they weren't keeping up to date as well as Apple did. In a case like that, there's a lot of tools out there that do some of the things you're already looking at, and a lot of people will go to other open source tools like Monkey and start with that, or AutoPKG, the overflow session next door that they're showing over in 204 is about AutoPKG, I believe. There's a lot of tools out there that already exist, and I found in my experience, because I came into managing Macs at my school, when I came in, I was managing everything manually, a lot like you are. I had scripts that did a couple of things. I had software that I had to install manually, things like Adobe Photoshop that I had to install from a disk because that was the way that the license was then. Even though it wasn't modern, That was the way that we had to do it. So I started to learn all the same things that you're talking about, and I searched out what other people were doing. I found it great to go to a conference like this to see other people's plans. A lot of the things that you're doing might be able to be done by other tools as well. Along with Monkey, there's things like Outset. I think somebody did a presentation on Outset. If nothing else, it was mentioned in one of the onboarding sessions. And Outset is it's kind of an app and folder structure that lets you deploy scripts at different times when the machine boots, when a user logs in, whatever. We actually recently at my job switched to using that because we had been doing things by modifying the user project file for the user template. And it's kind of not supported anymore. As much as people say it's not supported, some stuff still works. So in, I guess, long form answer, it was, there's a lot of people out there that are doing the same thing. If you're not on the MacAdmins Slack, definitely join it. And you can pretty much pop in anywhere and ask a question, and if they don't have the answer, they're going to point you to the place that might, or Rich Trouton's blog, because 90% of things are posted on there. Anybody else have anything they want to add? Like I said, I want to be a discussion if we've got any thoughts, ideas. Over there?
Ready?
So I've tried to learn a couple times on Udemy. Is that how you pronounce it?
That's, yeah. That's one.
I've heard other people pronounce it another way. Anyways, I guess it's not so much a question, but it's like I've always run into like maybe they have a slightly different version of Xcode, and now it doesn't work exactly like they're thinking or they're describing, and so I've run into that issue where these online resources are slightly out of date and not updated, and you have nobody to ask really generally. So it's just something I've struggled with in trying to learn Swift myself.
Well, a couple things that I can throw on there is Udemy is one that I do find is more difficult than others, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that anyone can create and upload a project to there, which is great because it means that anybody who has some knowledge can share it. It also means that that might just be one person who did that one time and didn't ever go back and update it. But there are other tools too sometimes. There's Apple's Swift Playgrounds on the iPad is generally updated as soon as new features for Swift come out. They've made it actually pretty cool. They've got that everyone can code program, which now some schools are doing. Apple does it right at the Apple Store. I'm not telling you that's the best way to do it, but there are other places where you might find more up-to-date information. The other thing that you might find is that if you go to something like edX, I don't know that edX has anything specifically on Swift, but in the case of that, a lot of times they're very specific about the requirements when they start. They say that we're going to be running this version on this kind of operating system so that you know in advance what to prepare yourself for and you don't run into something like that where the project doesn't match the version that you have. Is everybody on the MacAdmin Slack? Pretty much, yeah? If you check the PSU Mac Hackathon channel, there was a link to the Swift document that Joel from Orchard and Grove was doing. And that actually is a pretty good explanation because it has a couple of projects that show you how to do something in Bash and then how to do it in Swift and how to do it in Python and how to do it in Swift so you can compare. And then it goes through and there's like 6 playgrounds that tell you how to create certain things, and there's a lot of comments and stuff. In that particular one, you can just download right now and it's relatively up to date because it just came out. But in all honesty, I've found more than anything else, having a community to refer to, like the MacAdmin Slack, has been awesome for when I have a question because I have very rarely found my question not answered pretty quickly.
I just had a quick comment and maybe 2 quick questions.
Sure.
I won't take too much of your time. Is your work open source? Is it available on GitHub?
Yep, my next slide, here, I can do that. My next slide has,
Excellent.
it's a GitLab, and I picked that like 90% because last year Joel did a presentation and he said he picked it because it had a cool icon. I thought that was a funny reason. And then everybody went all crazy about GitHub being purchased. So the files are simple. Feel free to take a look at it. I don't think there's anything proprietary in them because I just wrote it all by hand.
Excellent. I think it's a great idea. I think it's a great thing for learning as well. Another thing I want to comment, which I went through some of the same steps that you did, and this could be common knowledge, but from Python, when I do a bash conversion, you can call bash from Python to execute. So anytime I'm not sure how to do something in Python, like file input output, I just call bash, and bash does it. And the third thing was, I noticed you use packages. I looked at it honestly. I think it's a French product. It's very difficult to Google because you Google packages,
Yeah.
you'll get anything but.
That's why you have to
packages.
search white box packages.
Well, I have done that as well. I found a manual in French, and my French, I'm a bit rusty on that. So one thing that I could not figure out is how to configure the payload. The pre and post scripts are pretty self-explanatory, but I'm like, how do you get the payload in there? Can you touch on that very quickly, if it's not?
By payload, you mean like the
Exactly.
applications or
Which
documents you drop
file
on?
you want to put in?
So, I didn't prepare for this.
I think that there one slide that had a payload screenshot,
Yeah.
which kind of got me thinking about that.
In there, it's basically got a file structure,
Okay.
and you can drag a file in. If you need to add a folder, there's like a little plus sign. You can add a folder that doesn't exist and create one. We create one called management and put stuff in that folder just because that folder doesn't exist, and we create the permissions on it so that the user shouldn't be able to modify it and so on. But inside there, that the scripts have the execute permission. If I was prepared for this, I would have pulled up the application. But
Probably you're right. I think you've answered my question plenty. I think I might have to go back to it. I've started using package build instead, but I was wondering how did other people figure out packages when I couldn't.
actually, for the record, I found packages super hard to use for 6 months. I sat down with somebody who had been using it, and he's like, this is what you do. And I said, oh my God, it makes perfect sense. It really is kind of a drag and drop type thing. I just had never thought of it that way because the interface was so, I don't know if bland is the right word. There
Maybe
wasn't a
it
lot
was
of
not-
stuff.
Maybe it was not too intuitive, or maybe I found it difficult.
I found the same thing though. The only reason I learned how to do it was because I had a coworker who showed me.
Excellent. Any other questions?
Have you done anything with Interface Builder in Xcode? Because going back to the classes that I've taken, like it's just so intimidating and daunting, and it's confusing Interface Builder.
I have, and that's why I went back to doing this. Because for this presentation, I thought it was more useful to tell you what did work for me and some of the ways that I got to where it worked. I've done things like I've gone through Swift Playgrounds, and I just haven't understood enough of it, and I found Xcode to also be very daunting. There's a lot of documentation for it, but there's so much. Sometimes it's hard to follow the actual application and how to use it, and I shied away from that a little bit when working on this. I did want to learn Swift originally. My whole plan was to make a Swift app that would just check all of these settings. You click it, it would open up. Like I said, it got hard to do. Anybody else have anything? Questions, comments, concerns?
What tool do you use to write your code and stuff? Python, Swift, like do you?
I pretty much write everything in BB Edit. I used to use Sublime Text, but I didn't pay for it, so although they let you use it in kind of forever, every 13th time it pops up and says, would you like to buy it? I felt bad. BB Edit discontinued their the text wrangler, and now they just tell you to use the free version of the primary program, BB Edit. So it just tells you there's some stuff that you can't do, but if you pay for it, you can do it. And thus far, I haven't really found anything that I needed the paid version for, which may mean that I'm not doing as much advanced stuff as some people, but it's functional. If nobody's got anything else, thanks for coming. We've got about 25 minutes.